Friends and gamers, I'd like to talk about Pokemon today, despite how Pokemon's not really a huge attraction or common content theme on my channel, because there is a whole discussion surrounding the new Generation 9 games that just came out last Friday a few days ago. Pokémon Scarlet, Pokémon Violet, they just came out, millions are playing it, sharing their experiences with it, having plenty of fun with the game in normal and intended ways, and also in completely not intentional ways too. Now, this is not a review of Scarlet and Violet, rather this is something I think warrants a very real and important discussion in general for both Pokemon as a franchise, but also in regards to the rest of the gaming industry. Now, on Scarlet and Violet itself, I did dig on this game a decent chunk and also see what others have to say, and the general consensus I'm finding is that generally, a good chunk of people, in spite of the problems I'll bring up in a bit, think the game is still plenty of fun and a great time. The world design's really good, exploring this vast open world, seeing Pokemon tackle more of the open world game design, the character design, the new Pokemon, the Terra style mechanic, Terra Pokemon, fighting Titan Pokemon, the freedom of going through the game in any way you want, not being limited by the same monotonous route structure, trainer encounters like past games, and making them more optional than ever to battle, also giving trainers you fight time to recharge, so there's always room for you to grind and battle with your Pokemon, the writing and story even, textures on some mons like Charizard, Ursaring, or Camerupt being better. There is a really great Pokemon in there for a ton of people, and there is creative and ambitious stuff to appreciate and recognize with Scarlet and Violet. But that, and any other positive or negative critiques I might have with the game itself, will have to wait for another time. I don't know how long, but it's gonna have to wait for another day, because this has been running around in my head since the game launched and every time I DoorDash for 8 to 10 hours. Because while there are great things in the game, those things are very much hampered heavily by the game's wild number of performance and technical issues. I'll preface this right now. Players playing Scarlet and Violet are flat out going to experience different levels of glitches, different levels of jank, suboptimization, and bugs due to evident and currently non-evident variables. Like, some might not even deal with some of these glitches at all, but others may encounter one or another, multiple, or other glitches we might not even know about yet. But the point is, while that mileage may vary, there's a consistent fact a good chunk of players, like the actual majority of players, are experiencing some degree of these bugs and glitches. The general consensus most people seem to have is between it's a great game / Pokemon game and there's a good Pokemon game in there, but it runs very poorly. And running poorly is an understatement, because holy hell, this game runs like dog shit, and it's unoptimized as hell. What technical glitches and poor optimization am I referring to? Stuff like the frame rate dropping in certain segments, or most of the game in general, to like 5 frames. The game will teeter from 30 frames at best to 20 to 25 frames on average, if not lower. There's also graphical stuff like pop-in or rendering being noticeable and low quality. That's tame though. That's kind of like really tame graphical stuff, tame technical problems that the game has. Camera clipping through walls, obscuring the player's view, lighting disappearing or being obstructed, characters and NPCs' rigs just completely getting bent out of shape, going off model, looking unholy as hell, textures and objects taking forever to load, both in battle and in the overworld, chugging the game's frame rate as a result even harder, textures not loading at all until a full restart, characters moving around and across battles like NPCs walking through you or your Pokemon while you're in the middle of a battle, or your opponent's mispositioned to be above their Pokemon mid-battle, models and NPCs not even being fully modeled / rendered at all, bloom being turned up to freaking 111, leaving some buildings, and the lighting and general graphics becoming extremely harsh on the eyes, and not loading, skyboxes not loading, buildings and restaurants not loading, NPCs and Pokemon flat out disappearing out of the blue, appearing out of the blue in some instances that shouldn't really happen, or even your own in use, being invisible, like the box art legendaries being used as bikes. There's a glitch to where they're just completely invisible. You clipping through objects and terrain, falling endlessly until you restart the game, and even this memory leak glitch where playing your game for an extended period of time causes the game to crash and you lose your save data. There have been several reports of people losing their save data after playing for a couple hours, forcing players to use essentially this debug feature to circumvent that. Like, again, millions of players are going to experience different kinds of bugs and jank, but there are thousands of players and people reporting on all kinds of different glitches and bugs and more. And the fact of the matter is Scarlet and Violet is incredibly unoptimized for the Switch hardware as it is now, and some of these glitches are being met by the majority who bought this game on a pretty consistent basis. Personally speaking, all these glitches are absolutely hilarious. Like, dude, this is Pokemon. Some of these are comedy and hilarious, and how it just completely sucks you out of the game and looks absolutely long. Look at this. Look at what is this? What is happening? This is a Pokemon game. Holy shit. Forget Sonic 06. This is borderline Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric levels of buggy, unpolished, and objectively unfinished from a lot of what I've seen. Like, it's amazing, dude. That might be over-exaggerating, but bro, there's so many. And I can find so much enjoyment and fun in these glitches, as you can tell. But I'm not most people. Plenty of power to those who can enjoy the game amidst all the bugs and glitches like me. Keep having fun. You're winning. But it's completely fair if plenty of this is a turnoff to you or others and dampens your experience or sway on the game at all too. All these glitches I'm showing you and talking about range anywhere from mild, funny, and or distracting to unimmersive, disruptive, a slow drag when you account the game's playtime is also tied to the frame rate, or to even game-breaking, visually painful, terrible, and just sad for a lot of people that it's going to and has been negatively impacting a lot of players to a considerable degree. Even for those who'd say graphics and performance isn't a big issue, is now becoming an actual issue for them, since all of this on some level is dampening the game for them. Even when this game will get the inevitable patch to fix things, this also feeds into that whole thing that a lot of consumers do not like, which is how companies will release buggy and unfinished games and just patch the fixes in later, with the possibility of not all the glitches being fixed or new ones arising, despite how poorly the consumer's experience will be at launch. And even then, I know for a fact everyone wants a solid and consistent experience with any game out of the gate, as opposed to the release now and patch / fix it later method. And when there's a lot of people, not just a one-off Twitter clip crapping on the game's textures, trees, or whatever, but literal hundreds to thousands of people experiencing half of these bugs, that's not a good look if people are comparing your game to Cyberpunk or Fallout 76. And thus leads into my main point with this topic, and that's development crunch. I do not work for Game Freak or Pokémon Company. I do not work for Nintendo. I do not work for the industry in any way, shape, or form. A lot of us don't. But I have seen plenty of people point blame towards Game Freak or Nintendo, and while a part of me can initially get why, not only is Nintendo almost never hands-on with Pokemon at all beyond marketing and owning a third of the license, I don't even think Game Freak's the one at fault here either. To be fair, Game Freak as a studio ever since Gold Silver way back in 2000, heck even since Red, Blue, Green, and Yellow especially, we all know the bugs in that game, they've shown to historically be not the best developers out there, but even when they're not the best developers, they've managed to make spectacular and content-rich Pokemon games like Black and White, Black 2, White 2, Ruby, Sapphire, mainly Emerald for Gen 3, Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and especially since Legends Arceus, even when that game wasn't perfect or didn't run the best or look the best either, they have the creativity and mindset to strive for a more ambitious, creative, and innovative game for the mainline Pokemon series. So, my main guess as to why this is mainly because of development crunch. Like, we have always seen Pokémon Company and Game Freak dish out a brand new type of mainline Pokemon game every year or two, and just looking at this last year, the whole 365 days, we got 3 new/different mainline entries in the series. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl came out November 19th last year, made by a different company. Not even 3 months later after that, Game Freak releases Legends Arceus, being this new spin and direction for the Pokemon formula that damn near everyone who played it really liked and appreciated. 9 months after that, last Friday, the 18th of November, we got a brand new generation with Scarlet and Violet. Like, even though BDSP are very standard remakes of Gen 4, that's 3 entire new Pokemon games in the span of a year. And even with just Legends Arceus and Scarlet and Violet, just those two, Game Freak was making 2 separate games at the same time within 2 to 3 years max. Once again, with Legends being them trying to take Pokemon in a more innovative and creative direction. Like, now more than ever, we're starting to see this yearly pump of Pokemon games catch up to the developers and companies who own this franchise, because how poorly optimized Scarlet and Violet are is turning people away from buying the game, from continuing to play it, or just leaving with some level of disappointment, which you can't really blame them for feeling so, especially for how ambitious and well designed Gen 9 looks and is. Game Freak is the one who makes the main games and such, but my main guess, again from an outsider's perspective, so take any of my word with a grain of salt, is the higher-ups at Pokemon Company. Could be higher-ups at Game Freak, but my bet is the Pokemon Company more than anything else. Still enforcing these strict annual deadlines for these games because that's how they've always usually operated, and that's how they make the most money. Same deal as to why we're still using this dual release tactic for every mainline game that isn't Legends Arceus. And I compare to Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric because that game was also hella unfinished and buggy, but it feels bad and worse in Scarlet and Violet's case because of that, because this is Pokemon, because this is the absolute biggest multimedia franchise in the entire world and one of the biggest video game franchises ever, and because this new game was incredibly hyped up and looking to be like the best Pokemon game in a hot minute for a lot of people. And it can still be for some, for sure, even now with all these glitches, but it's a lot harder for most to feel that when the game can't even function properly. And some of this stuff rang true for the last couple mainline games as well that were developed by Game Freak. Legends Arceus didn't run so hot, wasn't optimized all the way, Sword and Shield was similarly too, BDSP didn't look terribly great visually either, but Scarlet and Violet is significantly more rushed and sub-optimized than ever, and for a brand new Pokemon generation, I can't blame people for thinking it's a huge letdown to deal with all of this for such a huge and beloved series like Pokemon. Especially after Legends Arceus 2. Bro, so many people who like Pokemon or played Legends Arceus loved Legends Arceus. I don't know exactly how well it sold, but between the step it took to change the formula, the combat styles, other mechanics and such, Legends Arceus was unironically the most celebrated Pokemon game across Pokemon fans in a long time, even when it wasn't perfect either. So to meet Scarlet and Violet like this is an even bigger bummer. And even in Scarlet and Violet's case, between gameplay mechanics or just the fact of how the game and world's designed, you can tell they really did try. It's another ambitious step and creative direction that's building off what Legends Arceus established. But with all of this, people feel incredibly let down and disappointed, and the game's just too unfinished, broken, or unpolished to fully properly enjoy. And I feel like this extends for the anime too. I didn't specify video game development crunch when I said development crunch. Did not say video game specifically. I just said development crunch. But for any of you guys who keep up with the Pokemon anime, Pokemon Journeys, these last few years, the anime's made multiple breaks and hiatuses and made multiple types of recap episodes as well, because the studio, OLM, has been understaffed and the employees and animators working there on the anime were also being overworked and underpaid, and plenty just quit. A very crunch-enthused environment, and even in spite of how Journeys is wrapping up satisfyingly for many, plenty of its run suffered in the middle because OLMs had this huge mismanagement problem of how they handled the anime and its production for years, not even specifically with just Journeys. But again, their model is catching up to them as well. It's why I'm trying to make this a whole topic across Pokemon as a whole, because once again, take this with a grain of salt based on the fact I'm not an insider or employee for Pokemon at all, but because Pokemon's this multimedia brand, a lot of other Pokemon media, anime, trading cards, toys, spin-off games, etc. have to coincide with the main games, so I have to assume the mainline games dictate the rest of the Pokemon multimedia more than anything else, and that leads me back to crunch with the main games too. Video game crunch culture period. It's a seriously bad thing that's been infecting and hurting thousands of people's lives in the entertainment and media industry. Anime beyond Pokemon as well. Studios in Japan like MAPPA, for example. Animation companies like Disney. Gaming studios that abuse the culture like EA, Bethesda, Ubisoft, etc. Crunch culture being this forced labor of people working overtime, usually uncompensated or unsatisfactory compensation, or even with health risks that wound up putting people in the hospital, deal with health-related injuries for the rest of their lives, or even life-threatening situations, has been a rampant and terribly consistent problem that's only recently becoming a more and more known occurrence to the public and needs to be dealt with, or at the very least be given an actual serious discussion for it being super common across the entire entertainment medium. But with Pokemon, Game Freak and the Pokémon Company, something I've had more experience with playing as a Pokemon fan, and something I've done more research on than other companies and fields in entertainment, the franchise desperately needs more room to breathe and has to stop doing these annual/biannual releases, especially for the people making these multimedia branches for Pokemon. The annual/biannual release model might have worked for a time, but it's obviously not sustainable in the long run for both the quality of the products and the health of the people involved in the production as well. It's giving way for more Pokemon related media to come out rushed, sub-optimized, be at a greater risk of not making as much money as the company wants, the products being at a greater risk of not being as fleshed out, expansive, creative, or innovative as either the developers nor the consumers would want it to be, and it's only going to serve to be a bigger detriment to the series. That pushing for more development time, more time off, and longer gaps between games and projects, abandoning this crunch culture, should be championed more as time goes on, and can serve as an example for the broader gaming industry, since Pokemon's typically seen as the tip of the top for a lot of people. Sonic Team did it with Sonic Frontiers, pushing against Sega trying to get the game out in 2021. Now it got delayed and is out in 2022, and now a lot of people really like that game. Treyarch managed to delay their next Call of Duty Black Ops game to next year, the first mainline COD game to get pushed back since 2004, and plenty companies and studios for other games and related media have also managed to provide more wiggle room and time to take breaks, chill, and give the workers, animators, programmers, and more the time they need to get their works done efficiently. As much as people can enjoy Scarlet and Violet even with the bugs and faults, this is probably one of the first Pokemon games that a lot of people are finally not really trying to brush off with any of its legitimate, direct, and objective flaws, but it's also something other branches of the franchise, or at the very least, the games and the anime are suffering from. Even when outsourcing to other studios like with BDSP, which was made by Ilka, they were still forced to produce a remake of a previous generation in the span of at max probably 2 years. Investing more in other studios or just more employees would probably help the franchise, but I would at the very least hope these guys are given enough time to produce and finish the work they're making, you know? Especially with the anime where animators are grossly underpaid and overworked. Who knows if it's any different, that much the same, that much better, or that much worse with Game Freak, or any of the production teams behind anything Pokemon. Again, outsourcing helps and has plenty of benefits alongside just hiring more people in-house, but throwing dozens and dozens of more programmers and game developers at the problem alone won't fix it, make the games be made twice as fast, or polish up any of its problems if they're not given the adequate time. People use the most financially lucrative / successful multimedia franchise in the world status as a means to emphasize they have the money to put forth better graphics, textures, animations, quality, and technology as a whole to put forth towards developing these games, which is true. But I'd use that status as a means to emphasize they're not going to lose that much money if they take an extra year or two off. People say this all the time because it's true, but this is a multi-billion-dollar franchise that's the biggest multimedia franchise ever, alongside Nintendo's heaviest hitter, besides Mario. So they have the money to provide more resources, adequate pay, and more developers to ensure higher quality output, mainline or spin-off game. Whether they want to supplement main releases with spin-offs in between, made by other companies, hire more developers in-house, pay all the employees of whichever branch enough money to compensate for their hard work and dedication at the very least, and or to simply bite the bullet and take longer breaks and gap years, both for the companies, studios, and developers to cool off and get more time to create and for them to produce better, more polished products. Some, or at the very least I felt this since Sword and Shield, but ever since BDSP and Legends Arceus, and now more than ever with Scarlet and Violet, I genuinely feel like the entire Pokemon franchise in the production of its major tentpole projects and products need to slow down and start developing games, anime, and other stuff with bigger time windows to do such. Like, a new Pokemon every 3 to 5 years wouldn't be the end of the world if at the very least they end up being spectacular games. Even more so if other companies are given enough time to handle spin-off releases like with New Snap, or maybe continuing the Shadow Pokemon games, Mystery Dungeon, Ranger, more puzzle Pokemons, and others, maybe a Pokémon Tournament 2, maybe a Pokemon platformer or a rhythm game. Like, you can spread all these kinds of Pokemon games out more to balance out the main and general content for fans to consume, but also balance the development time spent on any of these games. Spin-offs and merch can 100% keep the franchise afloat and still make enough money for the brand. And just looking back on this year, even ignoring BDSP, I know damn well a ton of people believe 2 big mainline entries in the same year is a little bit too much. Maybe even Game Freak employees in that sense, or also in the sense of just giving them more time to polish, program, develop, optimize, and perfect their games. Both graphically, because many bring up how lackluster the Pokemon games look and use that to undershoot the Switch's hardware, despite games like Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Editions / Xenoblade Chronicles 1, 2, and 3, Zelda Breath of the Wild, Super Mario Odyssey, Mario Kart 8, Luigi's Mansion 3, Smash Ultimate, and many more games on the system look completely spectacular and run very well on the Switch at the same time. So it's definitely poor optimization more than anything else, alongside a lack of proper development time, and it's to also give the game more time to flesh out any mechanics, story ideas, writing stuff, and more content in general to add than just your normal Pokemon romp until you become champion. I guarantee you, if Legends Arceus was our only main Pokemon for 2022, hardly anyone would be complaining, especially with how much people loved Legends Arceus. Like, if Scarlet Violet in some other timeline got pushed back to, at worst, spring 2023 or fall 2023, hell, maybe even 2024. Plenty of fans would be completely fine with that if it meant we'd get a more polished, more complete, and better game / generation. Even if Game Freak's not the best developer around, they totally have what it takes to make unbelievably good Pokemon games, like I said a while ago. And outsourcing to other developers is still a great idea that can reap plenty of benefits for the people involved and the brand when handed to talented and passionate people. But above all else, they need more time to do any of this effectively. I at least believe Pokemon as a series and multimedia franchise can stand to spread out their products and works more far out into the future, slow down their releases, give their studios and employees more time and space to breathe and work, be given more pay, and survive as a stupidly popular and lucrative franchise in that position still anyways. The games and other related media will end up being much better products, give people much better experiences, and sell much more when given that chance, and it is just one guy saying all of this who has zero connections to the companies involved, but I can't help but feel that opportunity / change has to take place at some point in the near future before it gets worse for everyone involved in the franchise. I doubt it'd send Pokemon on a dying path, given how freaking huge the franchise is, but left unchecked, it's gonna bite them back in the ass harder and harder and harder each time, and I know nobody wants that. But yeah, crunch sucks. Pokemon's releasing stuff a little too fast in my opinion, and not giving their own studios enough time, pay even, resources, and big enough deadlines to meet demands, and I feel like they can slow things down to fix all of that up and gain more faith and goodwill in and outside their companies and in and outside their consumer base and fan bases. I don't know if I can expect such to any degree taking place given its multimedia status, but something's gotta give to try and enforce that type of work environment and release/marketing strategy when there's this much backlash and backfiring from what Pokemon's been doing since the start, and when other branches of Pokemon, like other gaming and animated studios and companies as well, have been suffering from these tight, impossible deadlines and poor working conditions for years as well. This is something I wanted to talk about. Hope you enjoyed or found value in this at all. Thank you for listening and watching, and it may be a bit of a while until then, but stay tuned for more Pokemon content in the future. Stay super.
哟，嘿，妹妹，嘿，我来呀！共和大哈哈呀！拉面，嘿，来面，排个面，共和再见呀！哈哈，拉面，下手面，谢谢。